The whistle of a rope slicing through the crisp autumn air broke the silence that had settled over Alamosa, Colorado, in 1879. Sarah Zimmer struggled against her bindings, her honey blonde hair matted with dirt and blood, her once pristine blue dress torn and mudded from the brutal journey. The crowd had gathered to watch what they believed to be justice, the hanging of a woman accused of murdering her husband, a crime she vehemently denied committing. They all watched me die. She whispered, her voice barely audible as tears streamed down her dirt-stained face. Her eyes, the color of summer skies, scanned the crowd of onlookers, women clutching handkerchiefs to their mouths, men with stern expressions, children whose innocent eyes should never witness such horror. The hangman's fingers twitched in anticipation. Sheriff Donovan Foster stood nearby, his badge gleaming in the late afternoon sun, a stark contrast to the darkness of the occasion. The crowd had come from all corners of Alamosa County, for the spectacle a woman hanged for murder was not a common sight, even in the hardened West where death often came quickly and without ceremony. "I didn't kill him," Sarah said louder this time, her voice cracking with desperation. "Someone please believe me." From the back of the crowd, a lone figure pushed forward. His weathered cowboy hat shadowed his face, but there was no mistaking the determined set of his shoulders as he moved through the throng like a wolf through tall grass. Yancy Garrett was not a man who believed in coincidences, and the timing of Jonathan Zimmer's death and the accusations against his widow struck him as too convenient. "That's far enough," Sheriff Foster called out, his hand moving to rest on his holstered Colt. Yancy ignored the warning, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step toward the gallows. "This hanging ain't right, and you all know it," he called out, his voice carrying across the town square. "There's been no proper trial, no evidence presented that couldn't be challenged." "The evidence was clear as day," Foster replied, his mustache twitching with irritation. "Her husband's blood on her hands, his money gone from the safe, and her bags packed for leaving." Yancy reached the foot of the gallows and looked up at Sarah. Their eyes met hers, filled with fear and a flicker of hope, his with a steady resolve that had seen him through many dangerous situations. "I'm asking for a stay," Yancy announced, addressing not just the sheriff but the entire town. "1 week to find the truth." "The truth's already been found," Foster sneered. "Then what's 1 more week?" Yancy countered. "If she's guilty, she'll hang just the same, but if there's a chance an innocent woman's about to die, don't you reckon that's worth a few more days?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement while others shouted for the hanging to proceed. Foster looked uncomfortable, his authority challenged in front of the very people who had elected him. "You ain't got the authority, Garrett," Foster said, though with less conviction. "No, but Judge Wilson does." Yancy nodded toward the elderly man standing at the edge of the crowd. "And I reckon he'd rather be sure than sorry when it comes to hanging a woman." Judge Wilson stepped forward, his face grave. "The law must be certain, Sheriff. A stay of 1 week is granted." He turned to Yancy. "But she remains in custody, and if no new evidence is found, the sentence will be carried out as planned." Foster's face flushed with anger, but he couldn't argue with the judge. "Fine, 1 week. But she stays locked up and you stay out of my way, Garrett." Yancy nodded, then climbed the steps of the gallows. The hangman stepped aside, confusion evident on his face as Yancy approached Sarah. "They all watched me die." She whispered again as he reached her, her voice hoarse from crying. The cowboy untied her, his calloused fingers working quickly to loosen the rough hemp rope that had left angry red marks on her wrists. "Not today, madam," he said softly, for her ears only. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Then Yancy Garrett did the unthinkable. He lifted Sarah into his arms, carrying her down the steps of the gallows while the crowd watched in stunned silence. Some gasped at his audacity, others whispered behind cupped hands, but all recognized the significance of his actions. In a town where reputations were built on far less, Yancy had just tied his fate to that of an accused murderess. "She goes back to the jail," Foster ordered, recovering his composure. "I'll escort her myself," Yancy replied, setting Sarah gently on her feet but keeping a supportive arm around her waist. As they walked toward the jailhouse, Sarah leaned in close. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't even know me." Yancy kept his eyes forward, aware of the many gazes following them. "I know enough to recognize when something ain't right. Your husband's death has too many loose ends, and I aim to tie them up before they hang an innocent woman." "How can you be so sure I'm innocent?" Yancy finally looked down at her, his expression softening. "I'm not, but you deserve the chance to prove it." Inside the jailhouse, Foster unlocked the cell door with unnecessary force. "1 week, Garrett, then we finish what we started today." Yancy helped Sarah to the small cot in the corner of the cell. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised. "Try to rest." As he turned to leave, Sarah caught his hand. "Thank you," she said simply, her eyes conveying what words could not: the profound gratitude of someone who had been staring death in the face and suddenly found a reprieve. Yancy nodded once, then stepped out of the cell. The iron door clanged shut behind him, the sound echoing through the small jailhouse like a reminder of what was at stake. Outside, the crowd had dispersed, but whispers followed Yancy as he made his way to the saloon. He needed information, and in Alamosa, information flowed as freely as whiskey at the Silver Dollar. The saloon was busier than usual, filled with people discussing the interrupted hanging. Conversations hushed momentarily as Yancy entered, then resumed with increased intensity. He approached the bar where Mabel, the owner, was polishing glasses. "Bold move today, Garrett," she said, setting a glass of whiskey in front of him without being asked. "Never took you for the heroic type." "Not trying to be a hero," Yancy replied, taking a sip of the amber liquid. "Just trying to make sure justice is done right." "Justice," Mabel snorted. "That's a flexible word around these parts." "What do you know about Jonathan Zimmer?" Yancy asked, getting to the point, Mabel's hands stilled on the glass she was polishing. "Came to town about 2 years ago. Opened the hardware store. Married Sarah not long after she was working at the dress shop when they met." She leaned closer. "Folks said he had money, though nobody knew exactly where it came from. And his death, found stabbed in his office at the back of the store, money gone from the safe." Sarah covered in blood, looking like she'd seen the devil himself. Mabel resumed polishing. "Open and shut, according to the sheriff. 2 open and shut," Yancy muttered. "Anyone else have reason to want Zimmer dead?" Mabel glanced around the saloon, then lowered her voice. "Rumor has it he was in deep with some people from Denver. Gambling debts, maybe, or worse." She straightened up. "But that's just talk, and talk is cheap. Anything else?" Only that Sarah always seemed too gentle for a man like Zimmer. He had a temper when he drank, which was often enough. Yancy nodded thoughtfully. "Thanks, Mabel." As he turned to leave, a hand clamped onto his shoulder. He found himself face to face with Clive Rawlins, one of Foster's deputies. "Sheriff says to remind you that interfering with the law has consequences," Rawlins said, his breath heavy with the smell of cheap liquor. "I'm not interfering," Yancy replied calmly. "I'm making sure the law is followed properly. You're sticking your nose where it don't belong." Rawlins' fingers dug deeper into Yancy's shoulder, and that nose might get broken. With a swift move, Yancy removed Rawlins' hand. "Threatening a citizen going about his lawful business. Don't think that's in your job description, deputy." Several patrons had turned to watch the exchange, tension filling the air like smoke. "Just delivering a message," Rawlins said, backing away slightly. 1 week. Then justice gets served one way or another." After Rawlins left, Yancy finished his drink and headed to his modest home on the outskirts of town. His mind was filled with questions about Sarah Zimmer and the circumstances of her husband's death. Something wasn't right, and he had a feeling Sheriff Foster knew it too. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of autumn day that reminded residents of Alamosa that winter wasn't far behind. Yancy rose early, his determination to uncover the truth stronger after a night of restless sleep. His first stop was the hardware store that had belonged to Jonathan Zimmer. The building stood dark and quiet, a closed until further notice sign hanging crookedly on the door. Using the skills that had served him well in his younger, less respectable days, Yancy picked the lock and slipped inside. The store itself was orderly shelves stocked with tools, nails, and various hardware supplies. But as Yancy moved to the office at the back, the scene changed dramatically. Despite the cleanup efforts, dark stains still marred the wooden floorboards where Jonathan Zimmer had bled out. The safe stood open and empty in the corner. Yancy examined the room carefully, noting the lack of signs of a struggle. If Sarah had attacked her husband, wouldn't there be evidence of a fight? Jonathan had been a large man by all accounts and not easily overpowered by his slender wife. A movement outside the window caught his attention. Acting on instinct, Yancy ducked behind the desk just as the front door of the store opened. Heavy footsteps approached the office. "Someone's been here," a voice Yancy recognized as Deputy Rollins said. "Probably that meddling cowboy," another voice replied Sheriff Foster. "Look around. Make sure nothing's been taken." Yancy stayed perfectly still as the men moved about the office. "Why are we really protecting this place, Sheriff?" Rollins asked. "Zimmer's dead and his wife's as good as." "Because I say so," Foster snapped, "and because there might be something we missed." "Like what? We took everything that mattered." Yancy's ears perked up at this. "Took everything?" "That didn't sound like standard procedure for an investigation. Just keep looking," Foster ordered. "I want to know if anything's been disturbed." After several tense minutes, the men seemed satisfied that nothing had been tampered with and left the store. Yancy waited until he was sure they were gone before emerging from his hiding place. Their conversation confirmed his suspicions that there was more to Jonathan Zimmer's death than a simple robbery gone wrong. But what had Foster and Rollins taken from the scene, and why were they so concerned about it? With even more questions than he'd started with, Yancy left the hardware store and headed to the jailhouse. He found Sarah sitting on her cot, her appearance improved from the day before. Someone had brought her a clean dress, and she'd been able to wash her face and comb her hair. "Mr. Garrett," she said, standing as he approached the cell. "I didn't expect to see you so soon." "Call me Yancy," he replied, removing his hat, "and I promised I'd be back." Sarah's smile was tentative but genuine. "You're the first person to show me any kindness since." Her voice trailed off. "Since your husband died," Yancy finished for her. "I need you to tell me what happened that night, Sarah, everything you remember." Sarah took a deep breath and sat back down on the cot. "I was at home, waiting for Jonathan to return from the store. He often worked late, keeping the books and such. When he didn't come home by midnight, I went to check on him." Her hands twisted in her lap. "I found him there in his office, already dead. There was so much blood." Her voice broke and Yancy waited patiently for her to continue. "I ran to him, tried to help, but it was too late. That's how I got covered in his blood. Then I heard someone at the front of the store and called out, thinking it might be the doctor or help of some kind, but it was Sheriff Foster and Deputy Rollins. They took one look at me, at Jonathan, and arrested me on the spot. Was anything missing?" "Besides the money from the safe," Sarah frowned, thinking. "I don't know, I wasn't thinking clearly enough to notice, but Jonathan kept a journal he wrote in it every night. I didn't see it in the office when I found him." "A journal?" Yancy's interest was piqued. "Do you know what he wrote in it?" "Business matters, mostly. He was very meticulous about his accounts." Sarah hesitated. "But lately he seemed troubled. He wouldn't tell me why, but I could tell something was wrong. He was drinking more than usual, staying at the store later." "Did he have any enemies? Anyone who might want him dead?" Sarah shook her head. "Not that I knew of. He wasn't the most pleasant man, especially when he drank, but I can't imagine someone hating him enough to kill him." Yancy considered this. "What about friends, people he did business with regularly?" "There was a man from Denver who visited occasionally. I never met him, but Jonathan always seemed tense before and after his visits." "Do you know his name, Blackfield or Blackstone, something like that?" Yancy nodded. I'm going to find the truth, Sarah, I promise you that. Sarah reached through the bars, taking his hand in hers. Why are you doing this? Risking so much for someone you don't even know? Yancy looked down at their joined hands. Because 5 years ago, I watched an innocent man hang for a crime he didn't commit. I didn't speak up then, and it's haunted me ever since. I won't let that happen again. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that neither expected but both felt deeply. I should go, Yancy said softly, reluctantly withdrawing his hand. There's much to do and time is short. Be careful, Sarah called after him as he left. I've already lost too much. I couldn't bear it if you were hurt because of me. The sincerity in her voice stayed with Yancy as he left the jailhouse and headed toward the telegraph office. If Jonathan Zimmer had connections in Denver, that's where Yancy needed to start looking. The telegraph operator, a young man named Teddy, looked up as Yancy entered. Help you, Mr. Garrett. Need to send a wire to Denver, Yancy said, scribbling a message on a piece of paper and sliding it across the counter along with payment. Teddy read it quickly, his eyebrows rising. Asking about Mr. Zimmer, huh? Lot of folks interested in that case. What do you mean? Had a wire come through just yesterday asking similar questions. From Denver too? Yancy's interest was immediately piqued. Do you remember who sent it? Teddy hesitated. Not supposed to share that information. Yancy placed another coin on the counter. It could help save a woman's life. After a moment of internal struggle, Teddy nodded. Was from someone named Blackwood, Ellis Blackwood. The name was close enough to what Sarah had mentioned to be more than coincidence. And the reply, what information was sent back? Sheriff Foster handled that himself, Teddy said. Came in specially to receive the wire and send the response. Yancy thanked Teddy and left, his mind working quickly. Why would someone from Denver be asking about Zimmer's death? And why would Foster personally handle the response? The pieces were beginning to form a picture, but it was still too blurry to make out clearly. Yancy needed more information, and he knew just where to get it. That evening, Yancy returned to the Silver Dollar, but this time he wasn't there for a drink. Mabel's brother, Oliver, was the stage driver who made weekly runs between Alamosa and Denver. If anyone knew about visitors from the city, it would be him. Oliver was seated in his usual corner, playing cards with a group of minors. Yancy waited patiently until the game ended, then approached. Evening, Oliver. Got a minute? Oliver looked up, his weathered face creasing into a smile. For you, Garrett, always. They moved to a quieter table where Yancy got straight to the point. What do you know about a man named Ellis Blackwood from Denver? Oliver's smile faded. Where'd you hear that name? Does it matter? It might. Blackwood's not someone you want to be asking about, especially not out loud in a public place. Why's that? Oliver leaned closer. Because he's got fingers in a lot of pies, not all of them legal. Runs gambling houses in Denver, but that's just the respectable part of his business. And Jonathan Zimmer. Did he have dealings with Blackwood? Oliver's expression turned guarded. Can't say for sure, but Zimmer rode the stage to Denver more often than a hardware store owner needed to. And once, about a month ago, he was on the same return journey as one of Blackwood's men. They seemed familiar with each other, but not in a friendly way. Did you ever see Blackwood himself in Alamosa? Oliver shook his head. Not personally, but there was talk. What kind of talk? That Zimmer was in deep with someone powerful from Denver, borrowed money, couldn't pay it back. You know how these things go. Yancy nodded slowly. And Sheriff Foster, any connection there? Oliver's eyes darted around the saloon before he answered. Foster's been sheriff for 6 years, never seemed to have much money until about 2 years ago. Then suddenly he's building a fine new house on the north side of town. Mighty coincidental timing, wouldn't you say? The implications were clear and they painted an ugly picture. If Foster was involved with Blackwood and if Zimmer had crossed them somehow. One more thing, Yancy said. Zimmer kept a journal. Any idea where it might be now? Oliver shrugged. No, but if it contained information damaging to certain parties, I reckon those parties would want to get their hands on it. Yancy thanked Oliver and left the saloon, his mind churning with the new information. He was more convinced than ever of Sarah's innocence, but proving it would mean going up against not just the local law but possibly a powerful criminal from Denver as well. Back at his cabin, Yancy prepared for what might come. He cleaned his Colt revolver and rifle, packed saddlebags with supplies, and tried to get some rest. But sleep eluded him as images of Sarah's face, filled with fear and hope, kept appearing in his mind. The next morning, Yancy rose before dawn and rode to the cemetery on the hill overlooking Alamosa. Jonathan Zimmer's grave was marked with a simple wooden cross, the earth still fresh and mounded. Yancy stood before it, hat in hand, as the first rays of sunlight crept over the eastern mountains. "I don't know what kind of man you were," he said quietly to the grave, "but I aim to find out the truth of how you died. If your wife is innocent, as I believe she is, I'll see her freed. And if there's more to your death than meets the eye, I'll make sure those responsible face justice." As he turned to leave, Yancy noticed a small bouquet of wildflowers placed at the base of the cross. They were fresh, probably left the previous day. Someone besides Sarah was mourning Jonathan Zimmer, or at least keeping up appearances. In town, Yancy's first stop was the dress shop where Sarah had worked before her marriage. The proprietress, Mrs. Alina Whitfield, greeted him warily. "If you're here about Sarah Zimmer, I have nothing to say," she declared before Yancy could even state his purpose. "I'm trying to help her," Yancy explained. "And to do that, I need to understand what kind of person she is." Mrs. Whitfield's expression softened slightly. "She worked for me for nearly a year before she married Jonathan. Best seamstress I ever had, and the customers loved her. Kind, hardworking, honest to a fault," she sighed. "I never understood what she saw in him, to be honest." "What do you mean?" Jonathan Zimmer was not a gentle man. Sarah came to work with bruises more than once after they were married. Mrs. Whitfield's eyes flashed with anger at the memory. "I offered to help her leave him, but she always refused, said she'd made her bed and would lie in it." "But if he was abusive, couldn't that give her a motive to kill him, Sarah?" Mrs. Whitfield shook her head firmly. "That girl couldn't hurt a fly. Besides, if she'd wanted to leave, she could have. I would have helped her, given her a place to stay, money for a fresh start. She knew that." "Did she ever mention her husband's business dealings? Any troubles he might have been having?" Mrs. Whitfield hesitated. "She visited me about a week before his death. Seemed worried. Said Jonathan had been arguing with someone, though she didn't know who. Said she'd heard him yelling about paying what he owed and that he needed more time." "Did she say anything else?" "Only that she was afraid." "Not of Jonathan, though he'd given her reason enough. She was afraid of something else, something she couldn't name." Mrs. Whitfield's voice dropped. "I told her she could stay with me if she needed to. She thanked me but said she couldn't leave him, not when he needed her." Yancy absorbed this information, adding it to the growing picture in his mind. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitfield. You've been very helpful. Mr. Garrett," she called as he turned to leave. "Sarah is a good woman. Whatever happened that night, I cannot believe she deliberately took a life." "I believe that too," Yancy assured her. As he stepped out onto the street, Yancy nearly collided with Deputy Rollins. "Asking a lot of questions, ain't you, Garrett?" Rollins said, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. "Just trying to get to the truth." "Truth's already been established. Woman killed her husband for his money." "Then you won't mind if I verify that, will you?" Yancy replied, holding Rollins' gaze steadily. "Sheriff says to remind you that you're walking a dangerous line. Might be best if you left town for a spell. Come back when this business is all settled." "Is that a threat, Deputy?" "Call it friendly advice." Rollins spat tobacco juice onto the boardwalk. "Wouldn't want to see you get hurt over a woman who's as good as hanged already." Yancy stepped closer, his voice low. "Tell Sheriff Foster that I'm not going anywhere until I'm satisfied Sarah Zimmer has received a fair trial. And if anyone tries to harm her before that happens, they'll answer to me." Rollins' eyes narrowed, but he made no move toward his weapon. After a tense moment, he stepped aside. "Your funeral," he muttered as Yancy walked away. The encounter confirmed what Yancy already suspected. Foster and his men were worried about what he might uncover. That meant he was on the right track. Yancy's next stop was the bank. The manager, Harold Prentice, was initially reluctant to discuss a client's affairs, but when Yancy mentioned potential irregularities in the investigation of Jonathan Zimmer's death, Prentice became more cooperative. Mr. Zimmer's accounts were unusual, Prentice admitted after closing his office door for privacy. Large deposits followed by equally large withdrawals with no clear business purpose. Could it have been gambling debts? Prentice nodded. Possibly, or investments gone wrong. He was always vague about where the money was going, and the safe at his store was there. Typically a large amount of cash kept there. He withdrew $500 the day he died, Prentice said. Said he needed it for a business transaction that evening. $500 was a significant sum, more than most people in Alamosa would see in a year. If that money was missing from the safe, it suggested a motive for robbery and murder that had nothing to do with Sarah. One last question, Yancy said. Did Jonathan Zimmer have a will? Prentice looked surprised. Yes, actually. He came in just 2 weeks before his death and updated it, left everything to his wife with the stipulation that the business be sold and the proceeds used for her to start a new life elsewhere. This was unexpected. If Jonathan had been planning for Sarah to leave Alamosa in the event of his death, it suggested he knew he was in danger. Thank you, Mr. Prentice. This has been very enlightening. As Yancy left the bank, he felt he was getting closer to the truth. The pieces were coming together: Jonathan's connections to Denver, the missing money, Foster's suspicious behavior, and now the updated will. But he still needed proof that would stand up in court. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. 3 riders were coming into town from the direction of Denver, dust rising behind them as they urged their horses to a gallop. They reined in at the sheriff's office, dismounted quickly, and went inside. Yancy moved to a position where he could observe without being seen. Through the window of the sheriff's office, he could see Foster greeting the men. One of them, a well-dressed man with a neatly trimmed beard, seemed to be in charge. The others stood slightly behind him, their stances suggesting they were hired muscle rather than lawmen. A cold feeling settled in Yancy's stomach. If these men were connected to Ellis Blackwood, Sarah could be in even more danger than he'd realized. Moving quickly but cautiously, Yancy made his way to the rear of the jailhouse. The small barred window of Sarah's cell was just high enough that he could reach it by standing on an overturned crate. "Sarah," he called softly. She appeared at the window, her expression brightening when she saw him. "Yancy, what is it? What's wrong?" "Some men just arrived from Denver. I think they might be connected to whatever trouble your husband was in. I need to get you out of here." "But how? And where would we go? I'm an accused murderess. I can't just disappear." "I'm working on that," Yancy assured her. "Just be ready, tonight if possible." Sarah's face paled. "Tonight." "But the trial? I don't think Foster intends for there to be a trial. These men didn't come all this way just to observe justice being done." Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes, followed by fear. "You think they want to silence me?" "I think they want to make sure certain questions never get asked in open court. Questions about your husband's dealings in Denver, about money that changed hands, about who might have really wanted him dead." Sarah gripped the bars of her window. "Jonathan told me once if anything happened to him, I should look behind the painting in our bedroom. Said there was something there that would keep me safe." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I never had the chance to look before they arrested me. The painting. Which one?" "A landscape of the mountains. It was the only thing in the house. Jonathan insisted on hanging himself." Yancy nodded. "I'll check it. And Sarah?" He hesitated, then reached through the bars to touch her cheek gently. "I won't let anything happen to you, I promise." The tenderness in his touch and the sincerity in his eyes made Sarah's breath catch. For a moment they stayed like that, connected by more than just the immediate danger they faced. "Be careful," she finally whispered. "These are dangerous men." "I've faced worse." Yancy replied, though in truth he wasn't sure that was accurate. The stakes had never felt higher. As dusk settled over Alamosa, Yancy made his way to the Zimmer house, a modest two-story building on a quiet street. The house had been locked up since Sarah's arrest, but again, Yancy's less reputable skills came in handy. Once inside, he moved quickly to the main bedroom. The painting Sarah had mentioned hung over the bed, a rather unremarkable landscape of the Rocky Mountains. Yancy carefully removed it from the wall, revealing a small hidden compartment. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a sealed envelope. Yancy took both, replaced the painting, and slipped out of the house as silently as he'd entered. Back at his cabin, Yancy examined his findings. The journal was indeed a detailed record of Jonathan Zimmer's business dealings, and much more. It documented loans from Ellis Blackwood, initially for expanding the hardware business, but later for covering gambling losses. It also mentioned payments to Sheriff Foster for protection, and to look the other way regarding certain shipments that passed through Alamosa. Most damning of all, the final entry, dated the day of Jonathan's death, read, "Meeting B, tonight, will pay what I can, but it's not enough. Told him I'm done, can't do this anymore. He won't like it. If anything happens to me, Sarah must take the money and leave immediately. Foster can't be trusted." The sealed envelope contained $500 in cash and a letter addressed to Sarah. Yancy hesitated, then carefully opened it, knowing the information inside might be crucial. "My dearest Sarah," it began, "if you are reading this, then my fears have been realized. I have not been the husband you deserved, and for that I am truly sorry. The enclosed money should be enough for you to start a new life far from here. Do not trust Foster or anyone connected with him. Ellis Blackwood is a dangerous man who will not forgive what I've done. I never should have agreed to help him move his special merchandise through my store, but once begun, there was no easy way out. I am sorry to have put you in danger. All my love, Jonathan." The letter confirmed what Yancy had begun to suspect. Jonathan Zimmer had been involved in something illegal, possibly smuggling with Ellis Blackwood. He'd wanted out, and it had cost him his life. Then Sarah had been framed for the murder, eliminating a potential witness and neatly tying up loose ends. Yancy knew he had to move quickly. With the men from Denver in town, Sarah's life was in immediate danger. The evidence he'd found might be enough to clear her name eventually, but they couldn't wait for the legal process to unfold. Night had fully fallen by the time Yancy returned to town. He approached the jailhouse cautiously, keeping to the shadows. Through the window, he could see Foster seated at his desk, talking with the well-dressed man from Denver whom Yancy now suspected was Ellis Blackwood himself. The two deputies who normally guarded the jail at night were nowhere to be seen. This was both concerning and potentially useful. Fewer guards meant less resistance, but their absence suggested something ominous might be planned for Sarah. Moving to the back of the building, Yancy again stood on the crate to reach Sarah's window. "Sarah," he whispered. She appeared immediately, as if she'd been waiting. "Yancy, I was worried. There's something happening. The sheriff's been acting strange, and there are men I don't recognize." "I found the journal and the letter," Yancy told her. "Your husband was involved with Ellis Blackwood, smuggling goods through Alamosa. He wanted out and they killed him for it." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, absorbing this information. "I suspected something wasn't right with his business, but I never imagined." She looked at Yancy with renewed determination. "What do we do now? I'm getting you out of here tonight. Stand back from the window." Using the butt of his revolver, Yancy carefully broke the glass of the small window, then reached in to bend the bars enough for Sarah to squeeze through. It was a tight fit, but with Yancy pulling from the outside and Sarah pushing from within, she managed to make it through. "We need to move quickly," Yancy said as he helped her down. "My horse is waiting at the edge of town." They moved through the shadows of the alleyways, avoiding the main streets where they might be seen. They were nearly at the livery stable when a voice called out behind them. "That's far enough, Garrett." They turned to see Deputy Rollins, his gun already drawn and aimed at them. Sheriff figured you might try something like this, didn't think you'd be foolish enough to actually do it. Rollins, listen to me, Yancy said, keeping his body between the deputy and Sarah. Zimmer was killed by Blackwood's men. Foster's been paid to cover it up. Sarah's innocent. Don't much care about any of that, Rollins replied. I got my orders. The woman goes back to her cell. You go to the one next to her charged with aiding an escape. Yancy's hand hovered near his holstered revolver. I can't let that happen, Rollins smirked. You really willing to die for this woman, Garrett? A woman you barely know? He doesn't have to, Sarah said suddenly, stepping out from behind Yancy. I'll go back willingly. I won't have anyone else hurt because of me. Sarah, no, Yancy protested. She turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and resignation. You've already done more for me than anyone ever has. I won't be responsible for your death. Before Yancy could respond, a shot rang out. Rollins staggered, a look of surprise on his face, then collapsed to the ground. Sorry about that, said a female voice from the shadows. Never did like that man. Mabel stepped into view, a smoking pistol in her hand. Heard rumors about what was happening, figured you might need some help. Yancy stared at her in disbelief. Mabel, what have you done? What needed doing, she replied calmly. Now you two better get moving. There'll be more coming when they find him. Come with us, Sarah urged. You'll be in danger if you stay. Mabel shook her head. This is my home. Besides, Rollins had plenty of enemies. Won't be hard to convince folks someone else did this. She gestured toward the livery stable. Go, get as far from Alamosa as you can. Yancy hesitated only briefly before making his decision. Thank you, Mabel, we won't forget this. They hurried to the stable where Yancy's horse was waiting. He helped Sarah mount, then swung up behind her. As they rode out of town, the sound of shouting could be heard from the direction of the jailhouse. The alarm had been raised. Where are we going? Sarah asked as they galloped across the open plains, the lights of Alamosa receding behind them. I have a friend with a ranch near the New Mexico border, Yancy replied. We'll be safe there while we figure out our next move. They rode hard through the night, stopping only when necessary to rest the horse. By dawn, they had put considerable distance between themselves and Alamosa, but Yancy knew they weren't safe yet. Foster and Blackwood's men would be searching for them, and with the resources at their disposal, the pursuit could extend far beyond the borders of Colorado territory. As the sun rose, they found a sheltered spot by a small creek to rest. While the horse drank, Sarah and Yancy sat side by side on a fallen log. I never thanked you properly, Sarah said, looking at Yancy with eyes that reflected the rising sun. You risked everything for me, a woman you barely knew. I knew enough, Yancy replied simply. I knew you were innocent, and that was all that mattered. Sarah's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. And now, what happens now? Now we prove your innocence. The journal and letter are powerful evidence. Once we're safely at my friend's ranch, I'll send word to Judge Wilson. He's a fair man, he'll want to see justice done properly. And if that doesn't work, Yancy squeezed her hand. Then we keep moving, California, Oregon, wherever we need to go to start a new life, together if that's what you want. Sarah's eyes widened at the implication of his words. Yancy, we barely know each other. I know, he said with a small smile, and yet I feel like I've been waiting to meet you my whole life. Maybe that sounds foolish. It doesn't, she interrupted, her voice soft. Not foolish at all. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an understanding, a promise, the beginning of something neither had expected to find amidst danger and desperation. The moment was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Yancy was immediately alert, helping Sarah to her feet. We need to move, they're following our trail. They mounted quickly and continued south, pushing the horse as hard as they dared. The terrain began to change, becoming more rugged as they approached the foothills that would lead them to the New Mexico border. By midday, they could see dust on the horizon behind them, riders, moving fast. Yancy estimated there were at least 4 of them. "We can't outrun them much longer," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear that must have been gripping her. "We don't need to outrun them," Yancy replied. "We just need to reach Cal Thornton's ranch. He's got enough men and guns to make even Blackwood think twice." They pushed on, the pursuit drawing steadily closer. Just when it seemed their lead had shrunk to a dangerous margin, a familiar landscape came into view: the sprawling ranch that belonged to Yancy's old friend, Cal Thornton. As they approached the main house, several ranch hands spotted them and raised the alarm. By the time they reached the yard, Cal himself was waiting on the porch, rifle in hand. "Yancy Garrett," he called out, his weathered face breaking into a grin. "Been a while, and who's the lady?" "This is Sarah Zimmer," Yancy replied as he helped Sarah dismount. "We've got trouble following us, Cal. 4 riders, maybe more." Cal's expression turned serious. "Well, they'll find more than they bargained for if they come onto my land uninvited." He turned and gave orders to his men, who quickly took up defensive positions around the property. Inside the ranch house, Yancy quickly explained the situation to Cal, showing him the journal and letter they'd brought from Alamosa. "Ellis Blackwood," Cal muttered, his expression dark. "Man's got a reputation even down here. Surprised he'd risk coming this far himself." "He must want Sarah silenced badly," Yancy said grimly. "The journal implicates him in smuggling operations throughout the territory. If that information reached the right authorities, his entire operation could collapse. And your Sheriff Foster, in Blackwood's pocket, has been for years, according to Zimmer's journal." Cal nodded thoughtfully. "Well, you've come to the right place. No one crosses my property without my say-so." He turned to Sarah. "Mrs. Zimmer, you're welcome to stay as long as needed. Rosa will show you to a room where you can rest." After Sarah had been shown upstairs, Cal turned to Yancy with a knowing look. "So, old friend, is this just about justice, or is there something more between you and the widow Zimmer?" Yancy looked away, a rare moment of self-consciousness. "It's complicated, Cal," Cal chuckled. "Always is with the good ones." His expression turned serious again. "But you should know clearing her name won't be easy. The word of a dead man's journal against a sheriff and a powerful man like Blackwood, that's an uphill battle." "I know," Yancy acknowledged, "but it's a battle worth fighting." Before Cal could respond, one of his ranch hands burst in. "Riders coming, boss. 4 of them, just like Mr. Garrett said." They moved to the window. In the distance, 4 horsemen were approaching at a steady pace. As they drew closer, Yancy recognized Sheriff Foster and the well-dressed man he assumed was Ellis Blackwood. The other 2 were clearly hired guns, their hands hovering near their holsters. "Let me handle this," Cal said, reaching for his hat. "My land, my rules." Outside, Cal's men had taken up positions around the yard, rifles at the ready. Cal and Yancy stood on the porch as the riders approached. They stopped at the edge of the yard, just beyond the gate. "Thornton," Foster called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "This doesn't concern you. We're here for Garrett and the woman." "You're on my property, Foster," Cal replied evenly. "That makes it my concern." The well-dressed man nudged his horse forward slightly. "Mr. Thornton, I'm Ellis Blackwood. Perhaps we can discuss this matter civilly. I have no quarrel with you, but Mr. Garrett has assisted in the escape of a woman awaiting trial for murder. All we want is to return them to Alamosa to face justice." "Justice?" Yancy called out, stepping forward. "Is that what you call framing an innocent woman for a murder you ordered, Blackwood? Or paying Foster to cover up your smuggling operation?" Blackwood's composed expression faltered slightly. "Those are serious accusations, Mr. Garrett. Do you have any proof?" Jonathan Zimmer's journal. "Detailed accounts of your operation, payments to Foster, everything. And a letter explaining how he wanted out, how he feared you'd kill him for it." Foster and Blackwood exchanged glances. "Those documents were stolen," Foster said. "They're inadmissible as evidence." "Maybe so," Cal interjected, "but they'd sure make interesting reading for a federal marshal or a territorial judge who isn't on your payroll." A tense silence fell over the yard. Blackwood's hired guns shifted uncomfortably. clearly assessing the odds of a successful confrontation with Cal's well-armed ranch hands. Finally, Blackwood spoke. "Perhaps we can come to an arrangement. The woman's freedom in exchange for the journal and letter. She leaves the territory, never to return, and this unfortunate business is forgotten." "And what about Jonathan Zimmer's murder?" Yancy demanded. "What about justice for him?" Zimmer made his choices, Blackwood replied coldly. "As we all do. Consider my offer carefully, Mr. Garrett. It's the best you're likely to get." Before Yancy could respond, Sarah's voice came from the doorway behind him. "No, no more deals, no more running." She stepped forward to stand beside Yancy, her head held high. "My husband may have made poor choices, Mr. Blackwood, but he didn't deserve to die for them. And I won't spend my life looking over my shoulder, wondering when you'll decide I'm a loose end that needs tying up." Blackwood's expression hardened. "Then you leave me no choice, Mrs. Zimmer." His hand moved toward his jacket, but before he could draw his weapon, multiple rifles were raised and aimed at him and his companions. "I wouldn't," Cal said quietly. "Not unless you fancy being buried on my land." A tense standoff ensued, broken only when the sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention. A group of riders was approaching from the south, at least a dozen men, led by a figure in a long coat with a badge glinting in the sunlight. "Seems we have more company," Cal observed. As the riders drew closer, Yancy recognized the leader, U.S. Marshal James Harker, known throughout the territories for his unwavering commitment to the law. "Marshal Harker," Foster said, his voice betraying his nervousness. "What brings you all the way down here?" Harker reined in his horse, his weathered face unreadable. Interesting question from a man who's well outside his jurisdiction. He surveyed the tense scene before him. "Received a telegraph from Judge Wilson in Alamosa. Seems there are some irregularities with a murder case that need investigating." "Wilson sent for you?" Foster asked, clearly shocked. "After he received some very interesting information from a saloon owner named Mabel." Harker's gaze shifted to Blackwood. "Mr. Blackwood, I believe. Your name has come up in several ongoing investigations. How convenient to find you here." Blackwood's composed demeanor finally cracked. "Marshal, I can explain, save it for the judge," Harker interrupted. He nodded to his deputies, who moved to surround Blackwood, Foster, and their men. "You're all coming with me to Denver. There are a lot of questions that need answering." As Blackwood and Foster were being disarmed and taken into custody, Harker approached Yancy, Cal, and Sarah. "Mrs. Zimmer, I presume? Judge Wilson mentioned you might be in need of protection." Sarah nodded, still visibly shaken by the confrontation. "Yes, Marshal, thank you. And you must be Garrett," Harker continued, turning to Yancy. "Wilson spoke highly of you, said you were willing to risk everything to ensure justice was done properly." "I just did what I thought was right," Yancy replied. Harker's stern expression softened slightly. "Well, your actions may have helped uncover one of the largest smuggling operations in the territory. The journal and letter you found could be crucial evidence." "You'll have them," Yancy assured him, "along with our testimony if needed." "It will be needed," Harker confirmed. "There will be a proper trial in Denver for Blackwood, for Foster, and for all those involved." He looked at Sarah. "Including a retrial for you, Mrs. Zimmer, though based on what we know now, I expect it to be brief and in your favor." The relief that washed over Sarah's face was palpable. She reached for Yancy's hand, clutching it tightly. "How did Mabel get word to Judge Wilson?" Yancy asked, still puzzled by this turn of events. "Apparently she sent a telegram immediately after your escape," Harker explained. "Said she couldn't stand by and watch an innocent woman hang when the real criminals were walking free. Brave woman." "That she is," Yancy agreed. As Marshal Harker and his men prepared to depart with their prisoners, Yancy, Sarah, and Cal watched from the porch of the ranch house. "What happens now?" Sarah asked softly. "We go to Denver," Yancy replied. "We testify, we make sure justice is done, not just for you, but for Jonathan too." "And after that?" Her question hung in the air between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Yancy turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "After that, whatever you want, Sarah. If you want to go back to Alamosa, start over there, I'll understand. If you want to go somewhere new, begin a fresh life, I'll help you get there. And if I want you to be part of that life." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but her eyes held his steadily. "Then I'd be the luckiest man alive," Yancy replied, his own voice thick with emotion. Cal cleared his throat. "Think I'll check on those horses," he muttered, tactfully retreating into the house. Left alone on the porch, Yancy and Sarah stood facing each other, their hands still joined, the future stretching out before them, uncertain in many ways but filled with promise. "I know it hasn't been long," Sarah said, "and under different circumstances perhaps we would have taken more time, but life is short and precious, Yancy. I've learned that the hard way, and when you find someone worth holding on to, you shouldn't let go." "I'm not letting go," Yancy assured her, drawing her closer. "Not now, not ever." Their lips met in a kiss that spoke of new beginnings, of hope rising from despair, of a love that had sparked in the most unlikely of circumstances but now burned with a steady, enduring flame. In the weeks that followed, Denver was abuzz with the trials of Ellis Blackwood, Sheriff Foster, and their associates. The evidence presented was damning. Jonathan Zimmer's journal detailed years of smuggling operations, with goods ranging from illegal liquor to stolen gold moving through Alamosa under the protection of corrupt officials. Sarah testified about finding her husband's body, about her wrongful arrest, and the rushed proceeding that had nearly ended with her hanging. Yancy spoke of the inconsistencies he'd noticed, the investigation he'd conducted, and the evidence he'd uncovered. By the time the trials concluded, Blackwood was sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison, Foster to 15, and various associates to lesser terms. Sarah was formally exonerated of all charges related to her husband's death, which was now officially attributed to hired killers working for Blackwood. On a crisp autumn day, 1 year after the events that had brought them together, Yancy and Sarah stood hand in hand on the porch of a small ranch house just outside Alamosa. Using the money Jonathan had left her, combined with what Yancy had saved over the years, they had purchased the property and were slowly building a life together. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Sarah said, looking out at the mountains that had once seemed to represent her imprisonment but now symbolized her freedom. "A lot can change in a year," Yancy replied, his arm slipping around her waist. "A lot, and yet some things remain constant." She looked up at him. "Like what?" "Like knowing, from the moment I saw you on those gallows, that I would do anything to keep you safe. Like feeling every day since that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, happy ones this time. "They all watched me die," she said softly, echoing the words she'd spoken on that fateful day. "Or at least they thought they would. Instead, they witnessed the beginning of something beautiful. And unexpected," Yancy added with a smile. "The cowboy untied me and did the unthinkable," Sarah continued, returning his smile. "He fell in love with me and I with him." Yancy pulled her closer, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. "No, the truly unthinkable thing would have been walking away from you. Everything else, every risk, every danger was worth it to be standing here with you now." As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across their land, Yancy and Sarah remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms. They had faced death together and emerged stronger for it, their love forged in the crucible of adversity and now tempered into something unbreakable. In the distance, a rider approached Mabel, coming to join them for dinner, as she often did since moving to a small house nearby. Her testimony had been crucial in the trials, and though she'd had to sell the silver dollar afterward, she'd never once expressed regret for the role she'd played. "Another visitor," Sarah observed, pointing to a second rider following behind Mabel. Yancy squinted against the setting sun. "Looks like Judge Wilson. Wonder what brings him out here." They soon discovered the purpose of the judge's visit. After dinner, as they sat around the fireplace, Wilson produced an envelope from his coat pocket. "Official pardon," he explained, handing it to Sarah. "Signed by the governor himself. Not that you need it, being already exonerated, but he felt it important to formally acknowledge the injustice you suffered." Sarah accepted the document with trembling hands. "Thank you, Judge. This means more than I can express." Wilson nodded, then turned to Yancy. "The governor also asked me to deliver this." He produced a second envelope. "It's an appointment, U.S. Deputy Marshal for the Colorado Territory. Marshal Harker was impressed by your work on the Blackwood case, says he could use a man with your instincts for justice." Yancy stared at the envelope in surprise. "I'm honored, Judge, but I'm not sure you should take it," Sarah interjected, her eyes shining with pride. "You have a gift for helping people, Yancy, for seeing the truth when others can't or won't. I think you'd make a fine marshal." Yancy looked at her, still uncertain. "It would mean time away from here, from you." "Not necessarily," Wilson clarified. "Alamosa needs a new sheriff, someone the people can trust after Foster's betrayal. You could be based here, handling matters in this region under Harker's authority." The prospect was tempting. Yancy had never sought a badge or official position, but the idea of helping ensure that what happened to Sarah couldn't happen to others held strong appeal. "Think about it," Wilson advised. "No need to decide tonight." Later, after their guests had departed, Yancy and Sarah sat together on a bench in the garden behind their house. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked, resting her head on Yancy's shoulder. "I'm thinking that a year ago, I was a solitary man with few attachments and no real purpose beyond getting through each day. Now I have a home, a woman I love more than life itself, and possibly a new calling." He turned to face her. "What do you think about me accepting Wilson's offer?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "I think you were born to help others, Yancy. You helped me when no one else would, risking everything in the process. If becoming a deputy marshal allows you to do that on a larger scale, then I support it completely. Even if it means occasional danger. Even if it sometimes takes me away from you." Sarah took his face in her hands. "Life is always going to have danger, Yancy. We know that better than most. But as long as you come home to me, as long as we face whatever comes together, I'm not afraid." Yancy kissed her then, marveling at her strength, her resilience, her capacity for love after all she'd endured. "Then I'll accept," he said when they finally parted, "on one condition." "What's that?" "That we make it official, you and me. That you marry me, Sarah Zimmer, and make me the happiest man in Colorado Territory." Sarah's eyes widened, then filled with joyful tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Yancy Garrett, I will marry you." They sealed the promise with another kiss, beneath the vast canopy of stars that had witnessed their journey from the gallows to this moment of perfect happiness. 3 months later, Sarah and Yancy were married in a simple ceremony in Alamosa's small church. Judge Wilson officiated, Mabel stood as Sarah's witness, and Cal Thornton rode all the way from New Mexico to stand with Yancy. The town that had once gathered to watch Sarah hang now celebrated her wedding, most of the residents having recognized the injustice that had nearly been done. With Foster gone and the truth about Blackwood's operations revealed, Alamosa was slowly healing, becoming the kind of community its founders had envisioned. As the newly appointed Deputy U.S. Marshal for the region, Yancy worked to ensure that justice was administered fairly, without corruption or undue influence. Sarah, using the skills she'd honed as a seamstress, opened a dress shop in town, creating beautiful garments that soon attracted customers from surrounding communities as well. Their home on the small ranch became a haven, a place of peace and happiness after the storms they had weathered together. And as the years passed, that happiness only deepened, even as their family grew with the birth of their son, Jonathan, named in memory of the man whose death had brought them together, but whose final act had been one of love and protection for his wife. On warm summer evenings, they would often sit on their porch, watching their son play in the yard, marveling at the journey that had led them to this place of contentment. "They all watched me die," Sarah would sometimes say, "but instead they witnessed a rebirth. Ours." And Yancy would hold her close, grateful beyond words for the woman who had given his life purpose, and for the love that had blossomed in the shadow of the gallows, a love that grew stronger with each passing day, rooted in truth, justice, and the unshakable bond between a brave woman and the cowboy who had risked everything to save her.